Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon. I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League, and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts, and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
And I felt as I've got older that if I said I was middle class, I'd be betraying all those people that work so hard to allow me to have a choice in my life. Why is it that if you become successful in something, you cease to be working class? I don't buy that. There's hundreds, millions of successful working class people. And then secondly, we need to define what do we mean by success. It isn't necessarily monetary success. It could be rearing a good family. It could be being a good neighbour. There's lots of different ways we can look at success, particularly from a working class perspective.
Today I'm joined by historian Professor Carl Chinn as we get deep into what it is to be working class. What does that mean in 2024? What does it culturally mean? What does it economically mean? And what does it mean for people getting into the arts? Because we all know there's a major issue at the moment, which is excluding people from working class backgrounds in this feverish, late capitalist society. This is the Creative Condition podcast. Hello and welcome to The Creative Condition. My name is Ben Talon. I am your host. How are you? I hope you're well, guys. I hope you're doing good. I hope your summers are going well. I hope you're inspired. I don't know what I hope. I ran out of gas there. Welcome. I hope you're good. I'm excited about today's episode. It's been in the bag for a while. Professor Carl Chinn, who's a historian who specialises in a combination of the working class and also his hometown of Birmingham, home city, I should say, of Birmingham here in the UK. But it was predominantly his stuff around the English working class that I wanted to talk to him about, because that's me, that's him. That's our background, that's where we're from, they're our values, that's our culture. And I'm not sure what it means in 2024. So we'll have a little reflection on that in a moment. First of all, a major thank you to the founding sponsor of this show, Illustration X. You can check out their global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. They do a lot of incredible work for the industry, including their wonderful Trend X report that you can also see on their website. Big thank you also to the Ukrainian Institute, who I'm trying to support, and I hope you can too, whether it's a little retweet or you can commission somebody. They've got a wonderful creative community, but they're embattled by a war at the moment, as you will well know. Help them out. See what they're doing. ui.org.ua. So, Professor Carl Chinn appeared on my radar via the Blind Boy podcast. I'm sure a lot of you listen to him. It's a real incredible show, a real advert for what is possible when you work independently, with passion, with heart, and with authenticity. His show has gone mental. It's over 1 million listeners. It's a real great listen, and his guests are always broad. But we care about a lot of the same things, like creativity and the environment and social history, politics, all that stuff. So I listen to his podcast on a regular basis, and I came across Carl Chinn. So Carl is a Brummie historian who has an MBE for great reason. He's done so much good work. I think around 30 books now. He's written all sorts. So he's written The Real History of the Peaky Blinders, which we touch upon at the end of the episode because he's got a new one in that series due out. But his books are phenomenal and they range far and wide. So he's got books including They Worked All Their Lives, Women of the Urban Poor in England, 1880 to 1939. Birmingham, the great working city, our Brum, the Cadbury story, a short history. There's so much. And he's a real advocate for equality for working class people. And we're both from that background, so I had to reach out, and I thought he's way beyond my station. But the lovely thing is, when you're both driving forward with a particular passion, there's just something that transcends status. And Carl got back really quick and said, yeah, let's have a chat. Give me a few weeks. I'm on deadline for my next book. But if you can come back to me around here, we'll have a chat. And that's what we did. So what I want to do, and I'm not going to go too in depth because this is something that I need to explore through my writing before I come back to you with a more curated blast of my thoughts on what it means to be working class. But I thought I would just try a little bit, because I think that what's sad about today's culture is that there's such a demonization of lower income families now and working class people that it's become a stigma to be working class. We don't have a cat in hell's chance of getting into the arts these days. And even speaking to you as somebody who's been in the industry for 16 years and done well in my career, still very much working class. I've always felt that way. And there's a big part of this conversation with Carl today that validated the fact that just because you achieve something with your life and your career does not divorce you from your roots. My values and my culture and the way I'm raising my family and the way I conduct myself, the way I live my life is still very much working class, family first, treat people well values. And I personally think that is something that illustrates what it is to be working class. And that is not to say that any other social class, be it middle or upper, is devoid of that. It's absolutely not the case. But there is something inherent in working class people that we look out for one another. And I think that is because, particularly the older generations in our family, they had to live and work and provide for their family with great deprivation. My grandparents were a post-war generation who had next to nothing. They grew up in big families who were scratching around for, food to eat. Outdoor toilets, small houses cramped with families filling entire rooms. But do you know what they didn't lose? A love of life, a curiosity, a desire to do well and to overcome that and to do well in spite of their difficulties. So they passed that on to my parents' generation, and they too didn't have a lot. But what they started to get were opportunities to work and to provide for their families. And yet they didn't own things. They didn't have businesses. Not necessarily. Some might have done. Some started to attain them, I think, around this time. But they still got by without a lot. But for what they lacked, and I speak for the majority of the people that I've spent time with in my life and the majority of people that I have witnessed in their lifetime, they did so with love and with passion for their neighbourhood, for their community, and for their people, for their kids, for their corner shop, for their factory even, There was loyalty and allegiance, sometimes mistakenly, because they would be dropped at a moment's notice by the people who ran the businesses, and that's when you start to get into the class divide. Sadly, class divide is something that is just so prevalent in this late capitalist society today. The factories are not there. Working for the big man, for the firm. My granddad would always say to me, get in with a big firm, lad, and you will be right, you'll be set for life. Now, there's something about that was probably true in his life, for his entire career after the war. He worked for Denholm Velvets, which was a firm between Bradford and Keighley where he went to work and he worked his balls off. Now, I grew up next to Clough's Mill, which was a gigantic mill at the height of the Industrial Revolution that was a big employer in the town. And it was one of only about 3 or 4 massive mills, all near each other. And in the middle of those mills, you had pubs. And those pubs would be booming because that was where people went to socialise and share their stories and be a part of a community. So I think back to growing up and, it's that classic thing, being raised by the village. My parents were wonderful. They were there every step of the way. They gave us so much love, so much opportunity, despite being a low-income family. It didn't matter because we had magic, we had excitement, and we had wonder, and we had psychological and physical safety in our household. Now, beyond that, I would go and play out. I would end up in the local pub with my friend on a Sunday because that's where his parents were hanging out, who were currently looking after me. And we'd run around that pub, we'd play pool, we'd play football out back, we'd go in there, we'd know the names of some of the local characters, they'd look out for you. Your parents gave you a time to be back, but they trusted that the other family's parents would be looking after you, and that's what happened in my experience. So there was that broader community. We would talk to people who were different. We would be intimidated by people who were different. We would be welcomed by people who were different. And it brought such a sense of community to my childhood that I remember it very, very fondly. Now, my parents speak of the same thing. But sadly, today, I think with social media and with media demonisation of certain classes, of certain people from certain backgrounds, you know what I'm talking about. You only have to switch on the news today. There's fear. There's a culture of fear. The pubs are on their arses. Those mills don't exist. Those industries have been outsourced overseas. They've had the arse stripped out of them by capitalists who want every bit of profit. It's a dark time for the working classes out there. So when people get on about things like the reform vote and about, what Labour represents today and what Tory has doubled down on, where the hell do you go if you're a working class person who just wants to get by for their family? You are scared because the fucking Daily Mail and the Daily Express is ramming down your throat every single day that migration is the enemy, that the people are coming to take our jobs on small boats. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not getting on a political soapbox here. This is not what I'm here to do because Carl is a much more enlightening and warmer conversation than I am. But I think it's really sad because there's so much othering going on. They're taking the seed of issues that, yes, need addressing, like we mentioned in this podcast. Things like immigration, you have to have conversations. You have to look out for local communities and make sure that new people are integrated smoothly, because what happens if they're not is you get divisions. The local community, who have already established their presence in the local area, feel threatened. The people who are arriving get bad treatment because of that fear. They feel threatened. And then, what have you got? You've got people who are not communicating with each other, and then they go on the internet or they pick up their newspaper that is run by a billionaire who is spinning horrible, inflated, inflammatory headlines to make that fear worse. And what you end up with is a very disillusioned, downbeat community who are scared, who fear the other, and no one's talking. And it makes me sad because, I'm of partial Irish descent. So my dad's dad, I actually never met him, but he was from Travellers, came to England from Ireland. Is that not immigration? I think it is. I'm very thankful they came here because I loved where I grew up. I loved the family environment I was brought into. But what you've got in today's world is divisions and economic turmoil where it's harder than ever for working people to earn a living with this cost of living crisis and get by. So they end up marginalised from the arts because they become even more for the privileged, a luxury of the upper classes like they always were, apart from a few little blips in society where that changed. And then the people who do come to the country and want to work hard and contribute some expertise and integrate themselves are just, they're treated like shit because of fear-mongering and everything else. And what happens to the working class? They get demonised for voting for Brexit, for example. Now, don't get me wrong, like Carl and I discuss on this podcast, we both voted to remain, but that does not make us holier than thou. Truth be told, when it came to the voting, I was confused. I was not certain of my vote. I listened to people in my industry who knew a little more than me, and in the end, I felt like remaining was the smarter vote. I think time has told that it probably was, but there's not too many of us, I don't think, that could truthfully look you in the eye and say they really knew what was happening for that vote. I certainly didn't vote with confidence. So I don't think we should be demonising people who voted Brexit, because I think that it was presented to us and sold to us by people with multi-million pound campaigns as something that would be good for us or could be good for us. Time has told and continues to tell that it wasn't good for us. All that's happened is the elite the ruling class has exploited it to high heaven. Okay, this did turn into a bit of a rant. I apologise. But my point is, Carl Chinn is awesome, and we discuss a lot of these issues. We discuss what it means to be working class in 2024, and that's something that I messaged him afterwards about, and he said it's a much more fluid concept than it used to be. It used to be that if you were of the working people, you know, you went to work in a factory, you put food on the table, you didn't own many assets, it kind of made you working class. And I saw a thing, and it said, somebody said, if your name is on the building, you're probably upper class. If your name is on the desk, you're probably middle class. If your name is on the uniform, probably working class. Love that. I think there is a you know, an aspect of truth in that, but it's a very complex thing. So I would love to hear from you guys on what you think to be working classes in 2024. I'd love your thoughts on Carl, so hit me up, hello@bentalon.com for that. Love to chat, so let me know. Also on LinkedIn, drop me a message there. But I hope you enjoy this one today, because I think it's a real important issue in our time. I'm going to come back and do a specific episode about this, but I think the energy that working class people bring and the different way of seeing the world plays into why diversity is a great thing for creativity. Because we bring a fire, we bring a certain degree of fight, because we've had to grow up with a lot less. That's valuable in creativity. If you've only got people coming in from privileged, you're not going to get those unique ideas. Much like if you've only got working class people, you're not going to get the same variation. That's what diversity is. It's bringing a lot of voices together who can bring something that is bigger than the sum of its parts. Anyway, this has been a bit of a ramble. I apologise for that. But this is Professor Carl Chinn.
So I was very fortunate growing up well off. Dad was a bookmaker, an illegal bookmaker originally, went legal in 61. Mum was a factory worker from Aston. Dad was from Sparkle, both working class neighbourhoods. So although I grew up in a prosperous family, my mum and dad were very proud of their backstreet belongings, not just origin, they still belong to them. So I grew up as well with Dad being a bookie. We were kind of looked down upon by middle class people because of Dad's occupation, was seen as something wrong. Mum was very much an Aston woman. The old Birmingham phrase, when she was dying, she lived with us for 5 years. My wife was a wonderful carer. And a few times we talked about what Mum wanted. And she moved to South Birmingham from North Birmingham when she was 18, when she married our old man. But she never left Aston. It was in here. It was in her heart. It was in her soul. And when I was talking to her, she'd go, when I die, son, take me back home. The old Birmingham word for home is home. And I said, I did take her back home. I took her down the street, White House Street, Aston. There's nothing there now except a wasteland and some factories. But when Mum lived there, there was 35 great-grandchildren and grandchildren and of my great-granny and granddad. So when we got down the street, where the entry would have been to Mum's yard of back-to-back houses, her cousin stood, an old school pals, because that's what the street would have done. So from an very early age, Ben, I was very aware that I was privileged, that I had the opportunity to live in a better home, that I had the opportunity to have a good state education, but that I felt growing up working class because that was the culture I was brought up with. And I felt as I've got older that if I said I was middle class, I'd be betraying all those people that work so hard to allow me to have a choice in my life. Why is it that if you become successful in something, you cease to be working class? I don't buy that. There's hundreds, millions of successful working class people. And then secondly, we need to define what do we mean by success. It isn't necessarily monetary success. It could be rearing a good family. It could be being a good neighbour. There's lots of different ways we can look at success, particularly from a working class perspective. So my nan lived in a masonette after they moved out of a back-to-back in Aston. Spent a lot of time in the school holidays, stopping over at our nan's and going to the Villa. She was a mad Villa fan, as well as my mum. Always went to see Mum's uncles, my great-uncles in Kingstanding and over in Erdington, Aston, Pipe Hayes. Big family, Mum's family was. Fighting family, but they were rambunctious. They always told stories. Dad's family was South Birmingham. but they also told stories. And they could also handle themselves, but were not quite as robustious and boisterous as our mums, uncles. But I worked in the betting shops from when I was 13. And that again gave me an insight into the people I belonged to, because there was people that would bet with us. We had our betting shops in Sparkbrook on the Ladypool Road, where Dad's family had lived since the 1870s, who remember my great-grandparents and who told me stories. So I grew up, lots of people would come to our mums on a Sunday. There'd be our nan, there'd be my granddad Perry. Granddad came from Highgate, another poorer working class neighbourhood. He had a very tough upbringing. He had multiple sclerosis, couldn't walk, but he inspired me with his stories and his love of the old Brummie language. Without him realising, he was passing it on to me. So they were always together on a Sunday. Granddad would be there. Dad would bring Granddad over because he was in a wheelchair. My nan, Lily Perry, Granddad Perry. My auntie Wynne was often there. My mum's, well, she was my nan's younger sister, but like my mum's big sister. And then there'd be various cousins and aunts and uncles there as well. And the talk always turned then to the old end, down the old end. Their stories weren't the stories I read about in history books. They weren't about the people or places that I read about in history books. They were the living stories of the people I belonged to. So from a very early age, I listened to those stories. I was enchanted by them. And I think, given that I was born in 1956, I just caught the end of their world, just as it was being destroyed in the 60s. So I remember going to my great-grandmother's back-to-back. I remember visiting friends of my nan's in back-to-backs. I remember our nan's masonette, which is now gone. It was the first time she'd had hot water inside and a bath inside and a toilet inside. Yeah. I remember how fortunate I was, and Mum and Dad always drilled it into me. You don't forget where you come from. You don't forget your roots. So my whole life really has been about wanting to give something back to those I belong to. Not just my family, but all those families. Because when I started on the radio on BBC WM and then was writing for the Birmingham Mail and later the Express and Star in Wolverhampton, the Black Country, thousands of people wrote to me with their stories. I've got a huge archive. Can't get funding for it. If it was a middle-class archive, I'd get the money just like that. It's a working class archive. Hundreds of people I interviewed to get their stories. So those are the people that motivate me, and those are the people that still push me forward.
Brilliant. And you know, I really resonate with that idea of that should you come across success, whatever form that takes on, that it somehow changes your class. Because I'm from Keighley in West Yorkshire, so I'm you know, I live in Salisbury now. I've done okay. I've been an illustrator for 16 years. There's been a lot of lean years in there, but there's been some good years. But most importantly, I've been able to raise 2 small children, a lovely family. We've got a house that we can call our own here in Salisbury. That is great success to me. But does that make me middle class? I don't think it does. My values in this life are very much exactly what you've described there, Carl, which is storytelling and the human story and individuals, but also communities, because I think this is something that we need direly to get back to, which is that family unit and intergenerational.
It's about that sorry to interject there, but it is that intergenerational. It's also about recognising kinship networks. It's about recognising the importance of poorer women in poorer neighbourhoods who were the glue that brought the neighbourhoods together. Middle class planners and developers never saw these intricate micro communities. They're overlapped with the next street through a corner pub or a corner shop or a main shopping road. So from a small street, it would overlap to the next couple of streets, and they would overlap. So you build up the neighbourhood, from the neighbourhood to the town or the city. They never saw that. So when they redeveloped Birmingham and Manchester and Salford and Leeds in the 50s and the 60s, Sheffield, etc., they just went in pell-mell, knocked down everything, moved people out, split up those communities, didn't think it had taken actually generations. And what they didn't do to build up, what they never did, they didn't ask the women. They didn't ask the men, but really they should have been talking with the women. The only middle class people that ever asked for the voice of women was the Tudor Walters Committee at the end of the First World War, when they knew they were going to try and build homes for heroes. It never transpired, but the will was there. But they actually asked working class women, what do you want from a house? And they said, we want a parlour at the front and a room at the back. And they went, well, why do you want a parlour? Because when we've come to working class people's homes and there's a parlour, nobody ever uses it except on high days and holidays. And the women went, exactly. We want one room that will be tidy, that will have our tranclements in or our best little bits and pieces that we can show off to at Christmas Day or Boxing Day and high days and holidays. And that was the only time they started to build council houses in 2021 with parlours, but then the money ran out. And so it was only one room and a kitchen downstairs instead of a front room, a back room and a kitchen.
Your curiosity, was that, I mean, you don't realise this, none of us realise as a kid, do we, where this stuff comes from, because it comes very naturally. It's safe to say that that storytelling, that culture that you've just described must have played a huge part in your interest, and especially the local aspect with Birmingham. Was that encouraged and fostered within your family setup?
Yeah, I think it was fostered and encouraged unconsciously, and then more consciously as I got older, if that makes sense. There's a wonderful book that influenced me a lot by a man called Robert Roberts. I don't know if you've ever read it, Ben. It's about growing up in Salford in the first 25 years of the 20th century. Well worth the read. Deeply influenced me as a social historian. It's called The Classic Slum. Now, I wouldn't use the term slum. I used it in a couple of my early books, and Mum told me off. My nan told me off. They said, we might have lived in bad quality housing, but it wasn't a slum. So I don't use that term now, but except for when it is in the purely neutral sense of meaning an area of bad housing and insanitary environment. Because I think the trouble is the term slum then becomes code, not even code, a derogatory term for the people that live there. But let's stick with what Robert Roberts called his book. He called it The Classic Slum. It's so insightful. But one of the reasons I think it's so insightful is that his mum was a shopkeeper and his dad was a skilled worker. He said, we lived there. We were part of the community, but we weren't part of the community as well. So we had the view of an insider, but also he had the ability to be able to look from the outside of it. I feel in a way that I've been able to do that. I feel as like I'm an insider, although I didn't live that life, but I'm also able to look at it as well. Now, Robert Roberts was a big influence on me, a very big influence, because he came out with phrases like, to the west of us, beyond the tram lines, lay the middle class, bay windowed and be gardened. What a wonderful phrase to show the different levels. You know, you've got a bay window, little front garden. That makes you better off. Yeah. You know, beyond the tram lines, even more so. And when I did my doctoral thesis, it was about my dad's area, Ladypool Road, which we still live close by. I worked in there for a long time. I'd have gone at my head twice with armed robberies, got attacked with a machete on another occasion. But I still feel a bond with Sparkbrook. It's now an overwhelmingly South Asian, Brummy Muslim area. But I still love going down there because you can see the family and kinship networks are at work like they were with the white working class. And I think one of the things that's very sad that's happened over the last 30 years is that they're trying to split the working class up by antagonising whites against Muslim, African Caribbean against this body, you know, race, colour, creed, split us up. What's a poor white kid, a poor African Caribbean kid, and a poor South Asian kid got in common? Well, they're all poor here, but they're all poor.
Yeah.
They've all got that in common. They've shared this space. So for me, history is not only about looking at the past, it's about seeing you can't learn exact lessons because the context of time and place changes, but you can look for guides from the past. So when I was growing up, I would have said, if you'd have asked me this question about what influenced me to be a historian, probably about 30 years ago, I'd have said, well, I was always mad on history. Mum said from when I could talk, I talked history. I read history books. There were novelists like Rosemary Sutcliffe, who people don't remember today, except in my generation. Henry Treece, Geoffrey Treece wrote about the end of the Roman Empire in Britain, about the Vikings, etc. And I would have said I wanted to become a historian looking at King Arthur's Britain. around that period. It wasn't until I got to university and got my degree and was looking at doing a master's that the tutor I went to see said, Carl, you haven't got Latin. You got Latin O level, but not Latin A level. You can't do this period. He said, but we've heard you talking about where your mum and dad come from, about your family and all their stories. Go and see Dorothy Thompson. And I went to Dorothy Thompson, who, as you'll know, was a superb historian in her own right, wrote a really important book about Chartist women. But her husband, Edward E.P. Thompson, transformed the way that we looked at history with his seminal work, The Making of the English Working Class. Dorothy actually, Ben, gave me the confidence to write about the people I belong to. I'm the first one of my family to go to a grammar school, a state school, not a posh grammar school. There was a lot more grammar schools in the 60s and 70s. I was the first one to take O-levels, the first one to take A-levels, the first one to go to university. I originally went to Manchester, but I left after 3-4 weeks because I was so homesick. Nobody in my family ever left home till they got married.
Yeah.
So I came back. I was fortunate to get a job, an interview in Birmingham and to get in at Birmingham. But they're their institutions. The middle class set them up for them. There is that class ceiling, not a glass ceiling, a class ceiling. And there was a small clique of us from lower middle class, better off working class backgrounds who were outnumbered by private school kids. And they just got on with it really easily. It was their world. For us, we having to learn a new language. So you're growing up without the confidence that private school educated kids have. And I saw that as a teacher, the difference in their confidence. And it was Dorothy Thompson who gave me that confidence. She said, write about the people you belong to, the stories, Carl, that you've got as a young man then. I'm an old man now, but then back in the early 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, she was really believed in what I was talking about. And she encouraged me deeply. And for years, Ben, when I met her for our meetings, I'd call her Mrs. Thompson. And on one occasion, I was about 26 or 27 with married and 2 kids. And they said to me, Carl, please call me Dorothy. I said, yes, Mrs. Thompson. Call me Dorothy. Yes, Mrs. Thompson. Because that's how I've been brought up. It took me years to lose. And I don't think any of us from our background ever quite lose. Not the sense of inferiority, but the belief that perhaps should we be here?
Yeah.
It's our language. We're having to learn that. I'll give you an example. When I was studying for my doctorate, and I was working for the business, I was running the business for Dad, I was doing my doctorate part-time. I was giving a talk at a seminar, and EP was there, Edward Thompson, Dorothy, some leading people. And I wanted to quote this bloke whose name was spelled Bagehot. Now, to me, that was Bagehot.
Yeah.
I didn't know his name was Badgett. That's how he pronounced. But a very posh, upper middle class lecturer took great delight in bringing it to my attention afterwards in the questions. Edward jumped in and said something to me, yes, but it's about the talk. And I remember that distinctly. When I was doing my thesis, and I finished it when I was on the dole because Dad sold the betting shops in 84. After I finished I got married in 78. I did 2 years towards my master's and it was upgraded to a doctorate. Then we had our first child. So I left university, worked full time for the old man. I was still going to the seminars. And then Dad sold up. I'd had a couple of armed robberies, been attacked with a machete. So he said, that's it. We can't fight with these. Then we're packing up. I ended up 1 more year. I got an opportunity for 1 more year grant, but after that I was on the dole. But it actually gave me, I hated it, but it gave me the time to finish my thesis. And the day before I had to hand it in, you do your footnotes and all that. And I'd said to Mrs. Thompson, hark at me again, I'm 67. I said to Mrs. Thompson, I said to Dorothy, Dorothy, what do you do when you find something that you haven't found yourself, but it's in another work? She said, you say cited. Oh, great. So I did that. And the day before I had to hand in my thesis, I took it in to a lovely man who also understood me, called Dr. Ben Benedicts in the library. I said, would you just have a check, make sure I've got everything? And he called me back in later after. He says, Carl, most of it's fine. I said, but how do you spell the word sighted? I said, Sighdted. He said, why do you write it like that? I said, because I've seen it. It's sighted. He went, no, Carl, it's CITED. So that night then, I was going through, I had to hand the tip first thing the next morning. I think I got to bed about 4 or 5 in the morning. I was tip-Xing out, SIG. No, there wasn't loads, but I wanted to check it. I had to reread the whole lot to make sure there was no mistakes. So it's things like that that make you realise that no matter what a good education I had at a grammar school, which was good, it wasn't the same as kids who've grown up going to private schools. And it never will be unless we get a more egalitarian educational system.
Yes, then this is a big fight of mine, because, and this is what I wanted to drill into, because you mentioned something there, the confidence aspects of it. It's very real. I believe that to be passed down generationally. I come from, I think I was probably the last wave of students to get the old tuition fees. I graduated in 2006 in Preston on a degree in illustration.
Yeah.
I was able to do that thanks to unconditional support in a very, we were a low-income family, but what we had was a lot of love, a lot of passion for the arts. My uncle wrote comedy for people like Bob Monkhouse. And
Right.
yeah, he did it very fleetingly, very sporadically, just in his own time. He's always lived a very kind of quiet life, dipped in and out. Another uncle, now in his 50s, he's writing about the punk scene. My dad loves comedy, loves history, great storyteller, loves community. There's a lot of voluntary work now. And my mum went to college and painted, but not uni. I was the first person to go to uni. It wasn't really an option in their generation. They grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and you went to work in either a factory or, my mum did hairdressing. But what I had was the next generation where we had more opportunities to do that. So I was encouraged. Told me to choose wisely, because I was going to be doing whatever I chose for a lot of hours. So choose with your heart. We'll support you however we can. You won't ever be questioned. But I do think I was the last wave of students who graduated from courses that were closer to art school. And by that, I mean there was freedom to explore and play.
Yeah.
And we had not too unreasonable student loans. Therefore, we had freedom of mind to play and to meet like-minded people, and to actually take those 3 years to do it and to learn our craft. It's now become much more transactional because of the lofty tuition fees. I've got friends who are tutors. They have relationships where the kids won't experiment because they want to know they're on the path to success at the start of a 3-year degree in the arts, so they won't explore and play. And again, this is a very, I think this is brought on by those tuition fees. You don't have to look too far beyond that. What I'm interested in is that that confidence and how that's been passed down the generations, and the kind of historic role of the arts in terms of classes. Would I be right in thinking that, this was always a luxury of the upper classes?
Very much. And also, not only a luxury of the upper classes, we have to define what art is. Again, how are we going to define all these things? I hate the term lower class, because it means that, are we lower socially, economically, but also culturally? There's powerful working class culture which is looked down upon, but should be given its own place in society, its own respect. I think you're right. There is that legacy, and it's. I fear it's got stronger. I fear it's got stronger because I fear what's happened is over the last 40 years, 50 years, people like ourselves, our families have got on, and we've moved out. We've done all right. So I actually feel the position of people that may be in deprived neighbourhoods is now worse than in the past, because there's less people there, but they're more cut off from the rest of society. And that really angers me, because the poorer working class no longer matter economically. They don't matter socially. They don't matter culturally to people in power. They don't vote as much. So politically, they don't matter. What we've got to do is transform that and re-energise people. Do you know, Ben, it's not going to be, they talked when 1918, 100 years since women got the vote. No, 100 years since middle class women got the vote. The vote actually didn't go to my great-grandmother, your great-great-grandmother, until 1928. It wasn't until 1918 that all working class men, poorer men, found it hard to get the vote because you had to go and prove that you'd lived in a place for 12 months. Well, if they were like my great-grandparents, they were always knocking the landlord and moving. You couldn't get the vote. Mm-hmm. So we need to re-energise people with politics because that's what the chart is for. That's what the trade union movements began with. That's what the cooperative movement, all these movements were about equality, but energising people as part of the political nation. Too many of us now are divorced. We're either excluded or marginalised from the political nation. How many working class MPs are there now? How many MPs are there who've got small businesses?
Yeah.
How many are there? Very, very few, I would say. So the avenues, it's been cut off. The arts are cutting off people from working class backgrounds. Now, we were well off, not massively well off, but we were doing all right. Our son graduated at East 15 with a degree in acting, performing arts, was really good at it. He ended up trying to get people to sign up to charities on the street. He could get work, but it was unpaid. He appeared in plays in London, but it was unpaid. How can people, not just from working class, from many lower middle class backgrounds do that? Yeah. They can't afford it. So acting increasingly now is the sphere of only the sons and daughters of the well-off. Pop music's been took over by them as well. The only avenue that's left for many working class kids is football for lads and for girls now increasingly is football. It's outrageous. You know, in the 60s and 70s, there was outpouring of culture from working class bands. But now the biggest bands, most of them, not all, but most of them are dominated by kids who've had very privileged upbringings. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't be involved, but something's gone wrong in society when so many talented young working class people can no longer get into acting, can no longer get into pop music because they can't afford the instruments, or they can't get the gigs, or they haven't got a mum and dad that can get you in. Yep. And it really makes me angry, Ben.
Yeah, me too. And I think the awareness plays a big part in this, because if you're a young person now who's not had a good start, whether that's absent parents or just parents who can't afford certain lifestyles, then the arts don't land on your radar. You might watch them, you might go on TikTok on your phone, you might have Netflix at home, but you don't make the connection that that's a world you can access. And despite the support I had in the family, none of us was still truly aware of what the creative industry looked like. I was fortunate in that I had accidental mentors along the way, so school teachers who went above the call of duty to connect me with a local college, for example, and things like that. I relied on chance for that to happen. And I was supported. So for kids who are not supported, who are scratching around, who are getting kicked out of school and made to believe that they're stupid and bad people, how on earth are they ever going to have the time to find that? They're just not, and they don't. And then what you've got is the EBAC, which prioritizes all the STEM subjects and demonizes the arts. So things like drama and dance, which there are many proven track records as to how they help those people that I've just described to get confidence and self-belief and all those things. They're knocked to one side. So even the teachers who believe in them, who want to share them, are not in a position to do so. So where the hell are they going to even find the arts, let alone afford getting into education?
The national curriculum is a straitjacket. It's squeezing the life out of working class youngsters because it's not opening up opportunities, it's restricting opportunities. Lots of schools now, as you said, can't put on drama, they can't put on music classes, or they will put it on, but the mums and dads got to pay. How can they afford to pay? With this cost, I mean, bad enough before, but with the cost of living crisis, mums and dads can't afford to pay. I really, I think we see this new term Nepo babies, and those that have benefited as such, like the nepotism. So, well, no, we didn't benefit from it. Of course you did. Now, we all want to do the best by our kids, but it should be within a much more democratic, egalitarian society, which allows people to develop their talents and their skills. And it's forcing young people into thinking, well, it's not for us. It's not for us. We won't do it. And it's again, there was a wonderful councillor in Birmingham called Frank Price. He became a Lord Mayor in his later 90s. He did very well for himself. He came from a back-to-back in a poor part of Birmingham, Hockley. And when he became a councillor, he was determined to open the arts up for working class people. And without him, the Midland Arts Centre, what's now known as the MAC, wouldn't have happened. But increasingly, what we find with organisations that are set up to open up, working class people don't feel that it's for them.
Yeah.
And so what we've got to do is challenge that as well. We've got to break down that lack of confidence. People like me and you have still got it. After 67 years, I'm still feeling well, and we still face that. I've faced a lot of prejudice over my accent. Some people say, "Oh, he puts it on to make money." I'd have made a lot of money then if I hadn't had a Birmingham accent. I can tell you, I'd have got a lot more jobs. I faced it at the university. I faced it on BBC WM, our own station, where two different managers called me and said they had complaints about my accent being too broad, on a local radio station, telling me that I shouldn't use certain words. And I'll give an example of one of the words. I wouldn't use this word to a young woman, but in Birmingham, the Black Country, Stoke, and some other areas, the word wench is not offensive. So my nan was our wench. Our wench was your big sister who minded you and loved you and gave up her childhood for you. My mum, when she was dying, said to me, "Carl, set me back on. I'm a backstreet wench."
Yeah.
I use that phrase on the radio once to an older woman. And then I was called in the following week by the manager saying I shouldn't use that word. I said, "Why not?" I didn't use it to a younger woman because she wouldn't have known. She might have thought it was an insult. The next week, an old lady rang up. The first call I got was, "Oh, Carl, I do love it when you call us old wenches."
Yeah.
Me daddy. Now, they're imposing their language on us. They're imposing their attitude to what is right and wrong. It might be wrong for them, but it's not for us. And there's lots of words like that we're told we're not supposed to use. Phrases we're not supposed to bring into our speech. So we're taught from an early age that the way we... Have you ever heard of a folk group called Show of Hands?
I've heard the name.
They're brilliant. You must be... They've got a song about regaining patriotism and saying it's my flag too. I want it back. And they go, from an early age, we're taught to say the way we speak isn't right. Now, when I talk about patriotism, Ben, I'm talking about something inclusive. I'm not a nationalist. I can't stand nationalism. It excludes. It sets up the other to be against. Patriotism to me is a love of place, a love of country, love of city, love of town, love of neighbourhood, which is inclusive. As a Brummie from a white working class background, I welcome all those other Brummies and feel part of all those other Brummies. And they welcome me, not a one-way street. So I think it's really important that we should be working for a much more inclusive society. But also, I think one of the problems that we're faced with, white working class culture is continually denigrated by those in power.
Yeah.
Continually. Look at all the horrible stuff that was written after Brexit by middle class people. Now, I voted to remain, but all my family, outside my kids, voted to leave. That was their choice. I'm not going to demean them for that. I think they were wrong, and I think the evidence shows that we should have stayed in. But that was my opinion. I was not going to denigrate my cousins, who were all on big working class estates, for voting the way that they did. Yet the way that middle class people, so many, slandered and insulted working class people for voting that way was, to me, epitomised the dislike and the disdain too many of the upper middle class have for the white working class.
Yeah, I agree. And what we what we came to realize, and many of us saw at the time, was that that was a very expensive, calculated media campaign that brainwashed people, that sold people something that cashed in on their dissatisfaction with their lives, which were caused by the very same people,
I say this to people a lot. Yes, immigration and other issues are important, but the biggest issue was many people who voted out for the first time in their lives, were so disillusioned they thought that the establishment people who were actually running the campaign were for them. They weren't. And people were sticking two fingers up to the establishment by voting to leave.
Mm-hmm. Failed.
Because they're still the same people.
And this goes back to the community that we discussed earlier. I do believe that if we had tighter communities and things like gentrification hadn't driven people out of neighborhoods and broke that collective voice, that we wouldn't have the division that is imposed by media and the likes coming from the top down wouldn't be anywhere near as effective, because you'll be the same as me, Carl, as somebody who in their life and in their career gets out and talks to people from all backgrounds. You see that humans are humans, and well, I mean, to look at the history of that, I've heard you talk about the origin of the word Birmingham, and also, was it not our ancestors that went out to countries where the Asian communities have come in from, and messed up their societies, so that a lot of them came here on the promise of a better life, only to face massive prejudice and I'm from near Bradford. I've read up on the history of all of that, and the kind of in the 70s what the people who came from Pakistan and India had to face over here. It's if we all talked to one another and found the unity, you mentioned the Chartist movement with that kind of collective voice, then I think in the
Chartist movement, some of the great leaders, there was Fergus O'Connor, Irish, Bronte O'Brien, Irish. There was what was his name? You'll come back to me. There was a black leader, and so there's so many what we need to look through. What have we got in common? Not what splits us up. And I think that's what's happened over the last 40, 50 years, is the working class have been marginalised by being split up into different ethnic groups, different religious groups, old against young, as you said about earlier on, the intergenerational is really important. The communities have been broken up, and people. That said, I'm not saying that it isn't there anymore. I think there's lots of communities where people are striving to keep the neighbourhood together. But there's also a huge amount of disillusion. And I think that's worse now than the anger, because at least anger makes you want to do something about it. I think it's terribly sad that less than 100 years since we all got the vote, so many working class communities feel so disillusioned that so many people won't vote in this forthcoming general election, and the turnout in the most deprived constituencies will be lower than in middle class constituencies.
And I'm a firm believer that the arts are a vehicle to give us something better. And on that basis, I can't help but believe that decisions like removing the art subjects from the EBAC have an ideological aspect. I don't think the people in power are stupid. I think they know what they're doing. I think they're removing opportunities for people to actually be able to think for themselves, to think independently, to be energized in their lives.
There is definitely a class ceiling. I've faced it. I've hit it. I'm now a freelancer. I'm a lot happier being a freelancer. It was quite frightening at the age of 57 to lose a full-time job. Well, mainly a full-time job. It was 75% job at the university. A community history my community historian role was 50%. My teaching role was 25%, and then the other 25% was my writing and my radio work from myself. But to lose the community role, which was unique and pioneering, going out talking to people, recording them, going to schools and libraries, giving talks. Like my main talk is Many People's One Birmingham, to try and say, let's rejoice in our diversity, but let's also rejoice in our unity. To lose that role was really a blow at the age of 57 I was. It's changed my life. I think overall for the better, because I'm not beholden to nobody. I never really was beholden to anyone. That was part of the problem. I never schmoozed. I never mixed. I didn't go to their meetings and canapes and all that kind of thing. But I regret it because when I was at the university teaching, there were many working class students that, even if I wasn't teaching, would come to see me and have a chat. And I'm still in touch with some of them. I remember one student coming to me really upset that a tutor, she was in a class, in a seminar, and he was going around asking them, what do you think of this? And he came to us and said, oh, you won't know the answer. You're from a comprehensive. I said to her, you've got to complain about it. But she would naturally, which I understood, she was too scared to complain in case it rebounded on her.
Yeah.
I had things like that when I was a student, and also as I got older, because my works were popular and read. He's got to be fairly intelligent, but he can't be really intelligent because his books are being read by people, and he's got a Brummy accent. You know,
Yeah.
you've hit it. So we've got to smash that ceiling down, Ben. We have to smash it down. So every child, irrespective of their colour, their creed, their class, can have the same opportunities. At the moment, they're denied, particularly through the arts, to so many of our youngsters.
Yeah. And I've observed, in many, many ways, the energy, the valuable energy that comes from kids who've come from working class backgrounds when they're given that opportunity and they're taught that their voice has got currency, just like yours, your love of stories in your family. It brings an energy to a person's life and purpose that is just, rocket fuel. And that's valuable. That my industry at the minute, and I speak of design industry and arts and visual communication. Everyone's sort of saying, look, where are the working class kids, and how do we change that? But a lot of them agencies are giving out, free unpaid internships as a way into it. So you can't have it both ways, because I could never have afforded to have done that. Still can't.
And I think the other thing is, I don't blame any mum and dad that say to the kids, you need to change your accents a bit to get on. It's not the mum and dad's fault. It's society's fault. It's those who are in charge's fault for making working class people feel inferior for the way they speak.
Yeah.
The way that we speak is our language. We should be proud of it.
Do you know when I started getting a real pride in my accent and my own story was when I was able to get about and travel. So when I started first going down to London on my own, I was about 25 at the time. But, went down my first illustration portfolio, stayed in a cheap hostel, went around the city. But in that hostel were people from all over the world. We were paying £7 a night in Brixton. It wasn't the Ritz, but it was brilliant because it was full of people from all over the world. Suddenly you've got people really enjoying my accent, asking stories about my background, and all of a sudden get a real pride in that and start using that to my advantage and love it. That community thing. So I'm reading a book at the minute called The 15-Minute City. Are you aware of the 15-Minute City?
I've heard of it, yes. I haven't read a chance to read it.
Brilliant. Carlos Moreno is essentially calling for what cities used to be prior to the onslaught of cars in the 1920s, when neighborhoods and communities would be cut up for freeways and the likes, particularly starting in America and then over here. His thing is that we need a return to open green spaces and community squares and collaborative environments. And one of the things that he's pushing for is reintegration of different classes, because we can all learn from one another. And I think that they were some of my biggest learning curves when I would encounter, not necessarily people from another class, but people who had more life experience than me, people who could show me the way, because you especially need that when you don't have the cultural horizons that perhaps somebody from a middle class background has had, and I think that, like you said, the segregation and the way now that lower income families are all pushed further and further out of where their ancestral homes are. You see it in Brixton. That's an example. Places.
It's happening in Birmingham all the time, and I don't know why councils seem to bow down before developers, and they allow them to build. In Birmingham, we've got so many high-rise towers of apartments. We don't need any more apartments. We need homes for families, houses for families. And we need schools in these areas. But the city centre is becoming wider and wider and wider. And you see it Salford Quays, around the armories, in Leeds. You see it all over every big town in the city. Working class people being pushed further and further out. And in Birmingham, it's really quite stark, because on the top of the hill is the middle class central business district. It's really attractive. There's St Philip's Cathedral, there's the Council House. Grade 1 listed buildings. There's lovely bars and pubs and restaurants. But you go down the hill to what was the working class centre of Birmingham, the Bull Ring, and it's declining. There's no real investment going into the Bull Ring. Shrewsbury Market's won the best market of the year, I think, for the second or third time. And you look, they've got beautifully coloured awnings. As it's all like metal, everything's metal, and they're declining. They don't seem to want the traders in town. And yet the Bull Ring shopping centre, not shopping centre, the Bull Ring Market, sorry, are the only part of Birmingham where all Brummies of all backgrounds, colours and creeds and classes meet each other equally. They can't see that. They can't see it, and it's just dying. Instead of it being a place like it was when my mum and dad were growing up, when you had street traders, you had entertainers, and we could do it easily today, bringing in Bhangra dancers and steel bands and Morris dancers and everything else that would show off all of our cultures coming together. But no, there's no vision. There's no vision. And the other problem is as well, is that every time a developer says, right, we're going to put this up, but instead of 10% social housing, it's uneconomical, we've got to have 3% social housing. They bake the social housing provision down to as low as possible, and the councils go, yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. That's why we need a massive council house building programme, a massive building of council housing or social housing, whatever it may be, to really bring back life, working class life, to the increasingly gentrified centres.
Yeah, because then what happens is kids in London stabbing each other, knife crime. Of course they're going to do. I get really angry with the way that the media demonise those kids. And don't get me wrong, it's heinous when it gets to that point. Horrific for those families who lose people that way. But is there any wonder when, like you said about the sheer disillusionment and the lack of aspiration and the lack of voice and purpose, that's where human beings, every one of us, need that. And that's what, sadly, it comes to. That's the sharp end of it when people are pushed that way. And again, to keep coming back to it, again, the arts is how you resolve that, is how you give outlets to that negative energy and you turn it into something really valuable. Give those kids a chance to act. I've got last week's episode of this podcast was with a drama teacher. She gave me countless examples of kids who were getting kicked out of every other class, but they were top of the class in drama because they come in there, and those behaviours, those characters they've built, it gets a really positive
It's
context.
really interesting what you say there, because I used to go to, not as many now because I'm aging a bit, but I used to go to lots of schools, and I always went to schools in working class neighbourhoods because I have only got a limited amount of time. Schools in middle class areas get lots of visitors. Schools in working class neighbourhoods don't. So I always focused on them. And when I was giving my talks on the history of the area and talking with them and engaging with the kids rather than lecturing at them, it was always the teachers who come up to me after and says, some of these boys and girls don't engage with us normally, but they listen to the nans, especially the nans, and they'd be listening. And I'd say something like, who knows what the word blarting means, which is our old word for crying. And they put their hands up. I don't have an aunt says when I come in, sir, Mr. Carl, they go, she tells us to stop blarting, and or else I'd talk about the street names, and suddenly they'd come alive with it. Mm-hmm. And it was always the toughest kids or the most difficult to reach for whatever reasons that might be. And if I could just bring in there about my Peaky Blinder research, very far from the glamorised gangsters, the anti-heroes that we see in the series, the Peaky Blinders were nasty men. They were brutal. They beat people up for no reason because they didn't like them. In the series, in series one of the characters says, well, they're bad people, but they are bad people. They do bad things for us. No, they're not. They don't do bad things for us. They do bad things at us. So why should it be that in a working class neighbourhood, crime is allowed to escalate? What stopped it in Birmingham was strong policing, yes, more policemen in twos on the beat, stronger sentencing, yes, but churchmen and women and a few philanthropic middle class people putting on clubs, what we now call youth clubs, football, boxing for the lads clubs, girls clubs. So now a new form of entertainment emerged at the same time, the pictures, the cinema. So instead of joining the gang on the street corner of older men and youths, they'd be going to the pictures. We have to have facilities for younger people. Why don't they learn that lesson? That closing down youth clubs, getting rid of all the facilities in a poorer neighbourhood, means that a lot of kids have got nothing to focus upon, and they get drawn in to the gang or to the kid who's got the money for whatever reason he's got that money. So let's start from the bottom up. Let's invest in working class neighbourhoods instead of de-investing all the time.
I had a fantastic chat with Mac Ferrari, who founded Bike Storms. And it was essentially that he got himself in trouble in his younger years, lost friends to murder and all sorts. And he wanted to make sure that the kids who were going to follow in that same path didn't. And he recognised the collective movement around bikes and around having space to ride those bikes, just what I'm talking, mountain bikes and push bikes. And it grew to a movement of, over 3,000 kids. They now get police support going through London, cycling on the roads. And the purpose and the voice it brings to them kids in their lives is magnificent. And so many of them, and now they're getting sponsorship. They're going out around the world doing it. They're very skilled on these bikes. The context is kind of irrelevant, but you've hit up on it there. People need more than just to be surviving in their lives. They need entertainment. They need to be able to dream. They need to be able to feel like they're worthy. And, you can do that, like you said, through sports, through arts, through many different things. But the constant stripping of arts budgets, particularly by this successive Tory government, has been heinous. Youth clubs all closed down. And then, it's the voice of shock in their media and in their press that these, killings are happening. No, there's no shock there. This is inevitable when you take away all those things.
And why should good people put up with that? If it was happening in a middle-class neighbourhood, they'd soon stop it.
Yeah.
But it's happening in neighbourhoods that are under stress already.
Yeah.
They're already vulnerable. Yeah. And it's wrong. And I think, unfortunately, what we see is that the Labour Party under Tony Blair was moving away from the working class. They were becoming very much more a middle-class organisation. I've marched for jobs in Paris. I've been to Munich. I've marched in London, all over. And the blokes I was marching with were saying, Carl, we could understand it from a Conservative government, but Labour's supposed to be our party. Mm-hmm. They've had such a sense of betrayal that factories were being closed down at a faster rate under the Blair government than they had been under Thatcher, which was disastrous. Mm-hmm. Both times, both regimes were disastrous. So we've got to really reconnect politics with that. Unless we get the political situation sorted out, Ben, nothing will change with funding for the arts. Yeah. It's crucial that people become active. But again, it's so hard for people to become active because they're trying to get by. They're busy. Yeah. They haven't got the time to go out and become politicians. They haven't got the time to go out campaigning. They're trying to get by.
So Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. I'd love to just engage you on that a little bit, because I think that struck me as a great example of something that did have enough, that did capture imaginations and create an act. Not necessarily that, but can you think of any times when this, that kind of rebellion and something close to revolution did happen, when people did unite in that sense? And
Chartist number one. I think there was a big attempt in 1819 with the post-war reform movement. Sadly, we had Peterloo, and lots of radicals were imprisoned. They actually, when we look at what they're saying now, they weren't all that radical. They wanted a better life. E.P. Thompson quotes an old man after the new Paula was brought in with the hated workhouse. And this old man is saying, I think he was a framework knitter, something like that, a trade that was disappearing. He said, I'm in a certain situation, in a few years' time, my health will go. And I will end up, my children, I will not be able to look after me. I'll be in the hated workhouse. And do you know what he finished off with? England, my England, I love thee still. Mm-hmm. England, my England, I love thee. Not the political nation, that England in our soul, the England of his community, of his people, who he belonged to, betrayed by the political nation. And that's what's happening today. There's that betrayal of working class people. They're bearing down on their hopes and aspirations, cutting off avenues for young working class people to become engaged in the arts, be engaged in every form of art. Then TV industry. How many working class kids are in the TV industry?
Yeah.
Pop
Not
music,
many.
all these cinema, acting, all these as artists, pictorial artists. Everything's been cut off. And it's all about the cash nexus. The cash, you've got to get a job to do this. Now, don't get me wrong, we need a lot more apprenticeships. A lot more apprenticeships. But that should not come at the cost of arts. They can go hand in hand.
Yeah.
A lot of young people. My wife's a hairdresser. She's from a big council estate in North Dublin. I can't cut hair. My cousin's a florist. I can't put flowers together. We should be valuing all skills. It used to upset my colleagues at the university when I'd say, no, I'm not a professional. I'm a skilled worker. I've done my degree. I've done my doctorate. That was my apprenticeship. I'm now a skilled worker. And they go, no, we're professionals. Why is it if you've got an intellectual skill, you're somehow superior to somebody with a manual skill? No way. We're all equal. And we should be aiming for so many of our kids to gain skills, to be able to use their hands, their minds, every aspect of them, and be treated equally and with respect.
Yeah, very much so, and when you talk of creativity, people's definition of creativity always jumps to being artistic, when actually it's not. It's a human trait. And I spoke to Craig Oldham on this show, and Craig is a designer. He's from Barnsley originally, and he lives in Manchester now. But his dad was a big part of the miners' strike. And Craig brought out a fantastic book called In Loving Memory of Work. And it was all the visuals from the miners' strike. And he termed that as kitchen table creativity. And that was all the women of the strike, the workers who were striking, and the way they all came together. They made posters in their kitchen. There was a real unity and a real collective voice. And it's that kind of energy and that kind of solidarity that I think we lack, and is really, really inspiring. And I came across, while I was researching this, have you heard of Alexander Bogdanov?
No. Oh, yes, I have. Yes. Bogdanov. Yeah.
Bolshevik revolutionary. And
yes.
He founded a newspaper called, he serialized Art and the Working Class, which was his book, in a newspaper called Proletarian Culture. And his whole thing, he formed a movement, and he wanted to educate the workers about culture and about politics. He felt that if he could get working class people educated on those two fronts, then they would be able to stay current, to understand and see through spin, and able to he felt that if they could critique art and they could understand to unpick messages and themes and things, and they could do that in a political sense, then it would create a movement and it would keep people together. I just found that very, very interesting.
It is, but what's interesting as well is that didn't get very far. The reason being, Marx, Lenin were middle-class men. Mm-hmm. Marx had a disdain for what he called a horrible phrase, the lumpen proletariat, the poor, who were not involved in what would become the working class movement. To me, that term, the lumpen proletariat, is as offensive as the underclass.
Yeah.
I hate those terms because they dehumanize, they strip people of their dignity. Similarly, Lenin was from a minor noble family who believed that we have to educate the workers to do as we want them. So it was another form of control of our people, mm-hmm. to take over. So that's why I could have no sympathy with them. Yeah. I take a lot of their arguments. Friedrich Engels, he wrote The Condition of the Working Class in England, crucially important to Marx. Yeah, he went out fox hunting. He was representing his family in a very big factory. He had an Irish woman lover. And I believe, I can't remember now, but I think it's right, when she died, he picked up with her sister. Never brought her into society, did he, the hypocrite?
Yeah.
So I always worry about these self-appointed saviours of the working class from their backgrounds.
You have to hold a magnifying glass over that. I don't know what it takes, that's the thing. I think at the moment we, do people have to reach a breaking point? I don't know, but then I don't think that's healthy, because when you don't get, that's what authorities want, don't they? They want violence and they want unrest, because that's then where you can point the finger at.
I think the problem is now come back to the point I said earlier. It's gone past anger now. It's utter destruction, which is even more acceptable to those who are running the country, because if people are disillusioned, they don't act. Mm-hmm. They just try to get on with their own lives, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I don't know what the answers are, Carl, but it's you've certainly given me some insights into where we are at this point. Do you feel like it can change? Just to wrap this up,
I feel there's a hopelessness as well, Ben. There's a hopelessness that we can change things, and I understand that in people think we can't change it. What's the point of trying? I wished it was. I feel quite pessimistic, sadly. Quite pessimistic. I hope that any incoming government will start to recognise the importance of the working class and start to give value to the working class and bring forward people into high power who are working class and understand the working class. I hope so. I hope that we're not going to be disillusioned again.
Yeah, because without a voice at all levels, then it's disconnects and it's more divisiveness, isn't it?
And it is crucial what you've said all the way through. It's crucial that we stand up for the arts and that we make arts accessible to all.
Absolutely. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. And
thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for your time, Carl. I really appreciate it. And good luck with the new book. When can we expect that, by the way?
Probably sometime in the new year. I'm just putting the finishing touches to it now. I've got to sort the photos out. It's a very in-depth study, this one.
Yeah. Are you able to say what it is? Or?
Yeah, it's about the real Peaky Blinders. I'm going back to them, but in a lot more detail. I'm looking at how they baited the police. That's the term they used. How they abused women, how they bullied the people, the hardworking poor amongst whom they live, how they were involved in riots and paid by the Liberal Party and the Conservatives to disrupt each other's meetings. So they were sanctioning violence for their own ends, and looking also at racist attacks on Italians and Jews. So it's been a really long research project and a very deep one.
Brilliant. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Carl. Thank you, mate. Appreciate your time.
Take care, mate.
Massive thank you to Professor Carl Chinn, historian, MBE. What a career. What a bloke. I love chatting to him, and I hope you enjoy that one, guys. It's one of my, I always say it's one of my favourites to date, but I just love doing this show. I love exploring creativity and talking to interesting human beings. So get in touch, give me your suggestions for future guests. What did you think of the episode? If you want to get deeper into this with me, you can get the Creative Condition book. It is out now. It's my second non-fiction book. The feedback has been wonderful so far. I am absolutely thrilled that this 10-year body of work is getting the love that it is. So thank you if you're one of them. Please do leave a review if you've read your copy. It's really valuable. It doesn't matter where, Goodreads, Amazon, whatever the platform is, all good for me. Also, please do rate and review this show and subscribe if you haven't done already. It's really helpful to getting new listeners on board, to getting new show partners and all that stuff. Big thank you to illustrationx.com, founding sponsor of the show, and the Ukrainian Institute, ui.org.ua. I'd love to know your thoughts on what it means to be working class in the 21st century, because it's a fascinating concept to me. I in my lifetime, I'm kind of third generation of the people that I've met in person. So my grandparents, my parents, and now me. Are my kids going to be a sort of breakaway generation as kids who are being raised, with an all right wage? They've got all the time in the world to think about what they want to do. They've got all the things they could ever want. And so did I to a degree, but I think it's been even more so for these guys now. I'm very thankful to my parents for the opportunities they've given me to enjoy my life, to give these kids an opportunity now too. It could change at any moment. We could be sunk back into adversity. That's I think that's the thing when you're from working class stock. You're often never too far away from where you started, whether that's psychologically, financially, or, just in terms of how you perceive yourself. I find it really interesting. So let me know your thoughts on your circumstances, your situation. I'm going to do another episode where I actually write down my thoughts and curate them a little bit better than the rant that was the top of this show. So I hope that wasn't too much of a rant for you. And, there might have been some hot opinions in there, but I think we all feel quite strongly about who we are and where we're from, and just want a society that is not full of fear, that welcomes people, but also looks after original communities and people's well-being, and not driving out people. Places like Brixton and like Carl said about Birmingham, it really upsets me when I see the latest posh coffee shop spring up on the street, and those people are having to move out into another suburb because where their family has grown up, they can no longer afford to live. I think it's heartbreaking, and I think it's shame on the elites for not taking care of society so that people can still afford to live, But anyway, there we go. I'd love to know your thoughts. Interesting times we live in. That's about it, I think. I was thinking what else I might have to say there. Thank you to illustrationx.com and the Ukrainian Institute for supporting the show. Thank you to Carl Chinn for taking the time to chat today. And thank you, my lovely listeners, for taking time to come and enjoy the show. Get us your thoughts. hello@bentalon.com. That's about it from me. Have a wonderful week. Go back and check out episodes with Max Ottignon, founder of Ragged Edge, Yasmin Ali, chemical engineer working in sustainable energy, and all the great people who gave me their time of day before. Nice one, guys. Take care. I'll speak to you soon.